My name is not Milton Friedman or Alan Greenspan or Paul Volcker or Geinster or was it with Geithner or any of these famous economists. But all I know is that our economy is in deep trouble, and it's not the result of the work of this president or past president. It's just it has been the trend of the past 30 years or so. So I went to the city today and looked at so many closed shops and so many unemployed people all around me, and I sat down and reflected and put my thoughts together on what I've read, what I've listened to the past year or so. I wanted to just share with you some thoughts with regard to what took us to where we are now, and then what it takes to get out of it. And so I want to share some thoughts with you. Basically, the lesson of the history is that when many companies go bust, go bankrupt, and they close the doors, and so thousands and millions lose their jobs, then at that point, government may panic. And when they panic, when they really panic, they inject into the economy billions and billions and perhaps trillions of dollars. Where do they get that money? Well, if they can borrow, they will borrow, and when they can't borrow, then they'll print more and more money. What do you think would be the result for the money that you don't have, and you just print money? It creates huge inflation. What would be the result of that huge inflation? Well, the government would go bust. And then that's the point of real depression. So it seems to me that that has been the trend of the past couple of years, at least the past couple of years, or the past 4 or 5 years. So let me summarize the things that have happened, and then share with you some of the thoughts that I have as to what can be done. First, deregulation and flattening of the tax rates, and tax breaks for the very rich in the 1980s, and the consumerism culture of post-World War II, they've all come back to haunt us. Next thing is that dishonesty in high places, such as Enron and WorldCom and many other huge corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations that we saw a few years ago, resulted in evaporation of almost $1 trillion from our economy, and shattered the dreams of many investors and many small pensioners who had put their money in these kind of firms. 3, Wall Street continued to be the champion of this huge gambling business called the stock market. So a few smart cookies, MBAs, highly intelligent people are helping these huge firms, investment firms. So a few people pocket a lot of cash and they get multi-million-dollar salaries, and then of course the majority of us are losers in the process. 4, easy credit allowed the banks to give credit to individuals and companies far beyond their capacities to be able to repay. And so they invested in huge real estate companies or bought mansions that they could not afford, and they could not sustain that kind of lifestyle. Then major bankruptcies ensued, Circuit City and Linen and Things and Riches and Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, and so many others the past few years, and then millions lost their jobs, and many people with low equities in their houses, they opted to get out of the house because the properties was not worth the amount of loan that they carried on those properties, which were not worth probably that much that they had paid for it in the first place. So this is the point where government panicked and opted to bail out failing companies, absolutely failing companies. This which include banks and many financial institutions and some some failing industries, and these are the companies that deserve to disappear. Then, of course, the two wars sapped the economy further by bearing close to $1 trillion so far in the means of destruction, with no end in sight and with thousands upon thousands of civilians and soldiers being killed and maimed every year basically, the past 10 years. Now government borrowing has increased now in excess of $10 trillion, almost 1 year's total GNP for the whole country. And then they engaged in a legally sanctioned Ponzi scheme, right? For which Bernard Madoff and some church leaders are serving time. And those are the guys who also contributed their share to this economic downturn by siphoning off billions of dollars of people's hard-earned money, and so that became unproductive assets, worthless assets basically at that point. Now at this point, government contributed further to the pseudo-economic recovery through additional tax incentives to increase spending by the masses and buy things that they don't really need. So this is, we want to create consumption so that our economy is moving. We think our economy is moving. Well, then another thing we know is that our educational system kept lagging behind most other industrial nations, which in turn contributed to producing second-rate and an ill-educated population. Well, we know also that building contractors who built inefficient and expensive houses and pocketed perhaps 40–50% of the selling price of those properties at its peak when they were selling at those prices. And the realtors who were charging 6 or 7% of the price of those properties. So imagine if the realtor sold 5 houses of $1 million each in a year, he or she really had it made. So all of this is really non-productive asset, money which is not really earned, and all of a sudden somebody pockets $1 million, $2 million. So then, of course, we ended up with huge houses, inefficient cars, houses with square footage of 5,000 or 10,000. Many of them in this city and many other cities in the U.S., in which 2 or 3 people reside. And so with huge cost of utilities and upkeep, and of course this brick and mortar, so all of this is a non-productive asset, and a lot of resources, these utilities, and which is going to waste on an annual basis. It's not productive, it's going to waste. Then university professors, I was one of them, many of them with salaries of $150,000 or $200 or $250,000 a year, who teach 3 or 4 courses in a year and produce an article or 2 for important academic theoretical journals that hardly anyone reads or uses. At least I think so. At least for many non-productive fields, many business fields or administration fields that I was involved in. Then we also have a medical profession and a dentist industry that siphons off some 15% to 20% of GNP for what costs other nations almost half, other industrialized nations, almost half of what it costs us. And then, of course, we have this self-imposed consumerism. A lot of us just are addicted to going to these shops, to these department stores, and buying junk. A lot of things, toys, for grown-ups and for children. Millions upon millions of dollars. I went to one of those second-hand stores and one of these so-called Goodwill stores yesterday, and the guy was saying that in that one store they recycle some 3,000 pieces of clothes and other items every day, and so then a lot of people at this time, the business is booming. They're doing fairly well, but there's so much junk that they just pack them and ship them to third world countries. A lot of it, half of it is perhaps half of it or more, even at this time, is on a daily basis packed and shipped to other countries. This is the economy of waste that we have created. So, and then of course we have this huge deficit at this time, and trade deficits with an insatiable appetite for spending. Now, also, many of us know that there is probably 1,000 families in this country who control the rest of us in terms of means of production, in terms of assets, and who even at the worst of times, if they're CEOs of even the most failing business, they would still pocket tens of millions of dollars. Workers are laid off, but they still have to have that CEO, and that CEO has long-term contract for which he's paid tens of millions of dollars. So there are some huge problems that we have to deal with. Now, Apostle Paul says that money is a source of evil, all evil. And if money is not used for the good of mankind, it becomes totally evil. And perhaps we are at that point in our history that we have to deal with these kind of situations. So what can be done? What needs to be done? In this segment, I'd like to talk a little about bankruptcies, particularly bankruptcies of the recent years, and talk about it a little bit. Just going back to the Old Testament, there was a law which was called Mosaic Law, that everyone who had a debt to anyone had to pay it off within 7 years. Then, going back to some 700 years ago, a brutal law, which also kept some semblance of order during the regime of Genghis Khan of the Mongol Empire, that anyone who became bankrupt 3 times, his penalty was death. He would be executed. Now we come forward to the situation in 1600, where Spain was actually the first country that became bankrupt. Now, what are the causes of these bankruptcies, particularly in recent years? These multi-billion-dollar bankruptcies. I have a list, and you may add yours, and it would be good for discussion. Well, perhaps to a certain extent, incompetence of those in charge, who are paid millions upon millions of dollars to run the firm, and then to just pocket the money and escape, or simply say, okay, the company has gone bankrupt, they go to greener pastures and start roaming those pastures. There are tens of them, if not hundreds of them, who take advantage of the corrupt situation where they have been the ones who devour the assets. In addition to incompetence, is greed. Greed of them and greed of those who are the advisors, and greed of those who are in some ways deal with these firms in one way or another. Then there's a question of lack of oversight by any responsible entity to see what these firms are doing. So yes, freedom, yes, competition, but there has to be some level of regulation and oversight. From 1980s, we lost a lot of this oversight, and therefore we have seen a lot more huge major bankruptcies. Then there's also the question of interest groups who influence Congress, more so perhaps they influence more corruptible congressmen, and therefore laws are passed similar to the laws that led to free credit for a lot of people who were not creditworthy, and that led to this housing crisis and the housing meltdown, as it is called. And so many other reasons. So let me just go through this list of bankruptcies. September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers. Amount, $691 billion in assets. A lot of it just evaporated. September 26, 08, Washington Mutual, another banking and credit institution. $328 billion in assets. Number 3, July 2102, WorldCom, with his infamous CEO, Mr. Ebers, with $104 billion in assets. 4, June 1st, 2009, General Motors with $21 billion in assets. And at that time it had $173 billion in liabilities. Just imagine that. 5, November 1st, 2009, CIT, another banking-related institution, $71 billion in assets. 6, December 2nd, 01, Enron, one of the most infamous bankruptcies, where the auditors, the famous, and at this time we should say infamous, auditors of Arthur Andersen, who had audited this firm year after year, with $66 billion in assets, went bankrupt. December 17th, 2002, Conoco, that's the insurance holding company, $61 billion in assets. April 30th, 09, Chrysler, $39 billion in assets. May 1st, 09, Thorberg Mortgage Company, $37 billion in assets. 10, April 6th, 01, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, $36 billion in assets. So as you see, these 10 major bankruptcies, all of them in the last decade. 11, April 12, 1987, Texaco with $35 billion in assets. 12, September 9, 1988, Financial Corporation of America, another financial institution, $34 billion. 13, November 17, 05, Refco, another financial institution, $33 billion in assets. 14, July 31st, 08, IndyMac, Saving and Loan Association institution, $33 billion. 15, January 28th, 2002, Global Crossing, another major bankruptcy, $30 billion. 16, January 7, 1991, Bank of New England, $30 billion in assets. 17, General Growth Properties, real estate and finance, $30 billion. 18, January 6, 09, Leonardel, that one is in Netherlands, with many American investors. $29 billion in assets. 19, December 20th, 05, Calpeng Corporation, $27 billion in assets. April 2nd, 2007, New Century Financial, another financial, $26 billion in assets. Let me read a couple more. Then we come to airlines, which a lot of it was because of increase in the price of gas, and again not being able to remain competitive. Was United with $25 billion in assets, and then Delta, which declared bankruptcy protection on September 10, 2005. So as you see, 20 of those 22 bankruptcies are in the U.S. The majority of them, perhaps 80% of them, in the last 10 years. Something has gone terribly wrong. Lack of oversight, lack of adequate punishment or fear of punishment for these thieves, many of them thieves, who have run this country, who have run them to the ground, and who, to the very last minute, have said that there's nothing wrong and will continue. Like Lehman Brothers, whose CEO was claiming just 4 weeks before this bankruptcy that we'll continue. There's nothing has happened, and nothing is going to happen to us. Something has to be done. Thank you for your attention. First, there needs to be a spiritual solution to economic problems. What does that mean? Extremes of wealth and poverty should be eliminated. We have to be cognizant of the needs of the humankind. Whether we are running an industry or a firm or a business, we need first to ask ourselves, is this something which is good for society? Is it something that brings some kind of good? Or is it a fad? Or am I fooling somebody to buy my product? Tax system, it seems like it should be progressive and fair and equitable. Consumption of frivolous stuff must be reduced. Savings must be increased. Credit must be allowed within one's capacity for repayment within a reasonable amount of time. Wage system must be equitable, so that between the lowest paid and the highest paid in the firm, there are many articles that I've seen that perhaps to be the maximum factor of 1 to 20, so that if the lowest paid worker is paid $1,000 a month, the highest paid employee or the CEO should be paid $20,000 a month. But we know that 20,000 times 12 is 240,000. But there are many of these CEOs who are not earning or being paid millions of dollars a year, while the workers are paid minimum wage. This is just a systemic unfairness in the system, which creates that extreme wealth and poverty, which can brings about unsettlement and within society, so that we cannot work harmoniously together. The other point I have is that government loans must be reduced to a more sustainable level. Unnecessary programs need to be eliminated. Then military-industrial complex, according to the words of President Eisenhower, must become more accountable and a lot more efficient and considerably less costly. Military is costing this country almost $1 trillion a year at this time. So, and then suggestions for what to do as individuals. Well, many are suggesting at this time to invest, if you have extra money, invest in gold, and be trained in health industry. There would be always need for those kind of jobs, nursing and technicians and of course other jobs within the health industry, green technology, alternative sources of energy, and then take advantage of unlimited possibilities with this internet revolution. At this time, improve your entrepreneurial skills, whether it's carpentry or sewing or cooking or gardening. Try to be good at what you're good at, and try to buy gradually the tools of these kind of businesses, so that if you lose your job, if you are in deep trouble, you can survive, you can provide these services for your neighbors, for your friends. Just barter, trade with one another. Now, if you have extra funds, invest in companies that treat their customers fairly, are efficient, provide good service and good products which are not frivolous, and that provide these goods and services at a reasonable price for a vast variety of customers. So these are the companies that will survive beyond our lifetime, such as Walmart or Home Depot or GE or Honda or Siemens, etc. On a domestic or global level, our economy is becoming global, and we have to be open to all possibilities. Finally, live and learn to live within your means, regardless of this hype of borrow, 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 buy, 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 and consume, consume, consume. I hope this helps, and thank you for your attention.